Lovely. Just the normal stuff of if you can put yourself onto mute if you're not contributing, it just does help the meeting. So we don't get background noise. And I'm not asking people to raise hands in the chat function. I can see everyone on the screen. So if you just give me a verbal signal like that, if you would like to come in, that I think that I just aid a smoother running of the meeting. Okay, we've got 1 minute to go. Yes. You're on mute.
Sarah's having trouble logging on. She's just texted me. So she's trying. Hopefully she'll be with us shortly.
Okay. I'm more than willing to wait for her to join before we start the meeting.
Okay.
Oh, the Sarah.
Yes, our auditor, Sarah, yes.
Yes.
Just to confirm that the live stream is now up, so we can start once Sarah gets in.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll give it a couple more minutes for her to get in. If not, we can make a start in a couple of minutes. And because the first bits on the agenda don't relate directly to Sarah. Have we have anything more from Sarah, Adam?
No, not at the moment. She hasn't attempted to get back in.
No, not yet.
Okay.
I think she's having trouble logging on.
Fine. I'm tempted to make a start because of the first couple of bits on the agenda are just the normal standards. And just for everyone on the committee and anyone watching on YouTube, we've got our external auditors in the meeting today. So thank you to Lisa and Francesca for turning up. I'm going to ask them to give a verbal report on matters arising, which is point 4 of the agenda, just after the minutes. So apologies for absence and substitutions, Adam.
We have apologies from Councillor Michael Hardware.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Simon Carter, Councillor Carter.
Yes, I have a pecuniary interest as a remunerated council appointed non-executive director of HCS Property and Environment Limited, which is referred to in item 10.
Any other declarations of interest? Fantastic. Okay, the minutes from the previous meeting on pages 3 to 6. Has everyone seen the minutes? Are there any matters arising from the minutes? I'll go to Councillor Perrin first.
Thank you, Chair. It was to do with item on the minutes under paragraph 47, annual audit letter. Last time we all met, there were a number of technical issues that hadn't been resolved. And so the audit letter hadn't been issued yet. I just wondered if those issues had been resolved now.
So Just straight after this, in this agenda piece, I will be asking the external auditors to give a verbal update on the work, and they will be happy to take that question then. Is that okay, Councillor Perrin?
Certainly. Would it be possible to hear from Mr. Freeman for the council side of things before we hear from the external auditors?
Yeah, Simon Freeman.
Can I suggest that I make my contribution at the same time as our BDO representatives at the end of the consideration of the minutes?
Yeah, so I will call you in first, Simon, and then call in BDO. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't actually attend the last meeting, but looking at item 50, minute 53, the risk management progress report, the minute ends up by saying it was agreed that senior management board should look at how the risk appetite could be adjusted to Hungary. This will be reported back to the committee. Now, I see there's nothing on the agenda about that, but say not being at the meeting, I wasn't quite sure what the context was.
So if I remember that discussion correctly, and bear with me, I believe that we were discussing risk appetite to certain sections of the risk appetite register, and councillor shared a concern that our risk appetite on the issue, and solely the issue of climate change, wasn't risky enough, if that's the correct way of phrasing it. And so we asked officers to go away and look at that. I don't know why it's not on this agenda, but I can ask for it to come back to the committee at the next meeting for an update on that matter. I'll pass over to Simon Freeman.
So I'll just give a brief update. Just to reassure the committee that the action hasn't been forgotten or left to be missed at any point. And really, it's just the point that, unfortunately, with everything that's been going on since pretty much immediately after the last meeting, we haven't been able to have that consideration at the senior management board, but it is on our list of work items to pick up. And I do hope that we'll be in a position to come back and give you an update on that at the September meeting.
Is that okay, Councillor Carter? Fantastic. Right, I will now invite Simon Freeman to give an update first on the audit letter, and then invite in BDO.
So I'll keep this quite brief because I think Francesca also wants to probably make similar comments. So from the council's side, the technical issues of it's one of those kind of, I think, situations where the more you pick away at something, the more comes to light. And while they all remain technical issues, I think we are now pretty close to finalising the amendments that need to be made within the 18-19 accounts. Two additional things that have come to light since the last meeting, and that involves both the current crisis situation that we've been going through nationally and locally around COVID, and because the accounts haven't yet been signed off and completed, we will be needing to put a declaration in the accounts related to the COVID crisis, just to make reference to them as effectively a post-balance sheet event, which we are now aware of. So that needs to be input as well. And the second point is, only last week, we had a revised pension statement issued to us by the pension board, by Essex Pensions, which links to something called the McLeod judgment relating to some fire operatives and a claim for some disparities in the pension scheme relating to particular age groups, if I remember rightly. Now, had the accounts been signed off, there would have been no issue for us. We'd have dealt with it during 1920. But there isn't an adjusting entry required in 18-19 accounts as a result of that change that's been raised with us by the actuary. So we've taken a decision, and I did discuss it very briefly with Francesca and Lisa earlier today, that while we have the opportunity, it would seem appropriate that we do make that adjustment. So we start the 1920 audit with a clean slate effectively, and all prior year adjustments having been picked up and dealt with. So that's the current situation as I see it. And hopefully that's pretty consistent with what Francesca and Lisa will be talking to you about in a moment.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. I think Sarah is trying to get in, and she's in twice at the moment, which is good to see. I will mute both of Sarah's accounts while she sorts out which one is on, but I will pass over now to BDO. Is it Lisa or Francesca who wants to talk first?
Talking first, so Francesca. Thank you, Chair. Because we are continuing to work with the council to finalise the 18-19 accounts. We can confirm that we remain independent from the council, and the independence declaration made previously are all still current. We identified 5 risks last year as part of our audit plan, and we've completed the work on 4 of them, pending the McLeod adjustment. So the 4 risks we've completed the work on were management override of controls, where we had no findings. Revenue recognition, again, we had no findings. The treatment of the HTS pensions costs and liabilities in your accounts, which we reported on previously to you, where you've adjusted your accounts to change the treatment of how you treat the HTS pension liability within the single entity account, so the council's accounts, not the group. And then also the pension liability valuation, you adjusted last summer from the McLeod adjustment, which Simon's just mentioned, which is to do with age discrimination case in relation to the change on a defined benefit scheme from being a final salary scheme to a career average scheme. Simon's obviously just mentioned, he's told us this afternoon that you had a revised statement and are going to do the adjustment through as part of the 18-19 accounts, and we'll look at that. Our other risk was on plant, property and equipment and the valuation of it. And this is where we've had quite a lot of work ongoing. The council have done an awful lot of work going back several years, trying to resolve what the issues are around the revaluation reserve and the valuations that have been done in the past. So it's all technical accounting issues that feed through the movement and reserve statement, and they don't actually impact on your general fund reserve. The council believe they now understand the issues and are in the process of providing us with revised working papers, which they're hoping to do in the next week or so. Once they've done that, we will then obviously work through those working papers, make sure that we're content with the adjustments they're proposing, they put them through the accounts correctly, and then we'll look to start to work towards signing off with Simon and his team.
Questions, anyone? Some Freeman.
Yeah, just maybe just to add to what Francesca's just updated with the committee. In the discussion that we were having with BDO this afternoon, I think what we agreed was that work would be starting on the final stages of the audit in the next week to 10 days. And that we are setting ourselves a target of the audit being completed, and under the delegations that the committee previously agreed, everything signed off before the end of July. Otherwise, we're in great danger of the 2018-19 audit colliding with the planned 19-20 audit, and I don't think that will be helpful for either BDO or for Harlow Council. So I think we're quite joined up at the moment in that being the target that we're aiming for, and hopefully that will give assurance to the audit committee that this isn't now going to be an ongoing, long drawn out process for many more weeks, and we should see the end of this in the next 4 to 6 weeks and all completed and signed off.
Any questions from the committee? Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Just to seek reassurance that BDO are content to do all this digitally or remotely. There's sort of nothing physical that they need to see or to check in these final phases?
I'm happy to answer that, Chair, if that suits. Yes, we're perfectly happy to work digitally. We have taken advice around various things like how we get proper audit evidence remotely and in the current circumstances, but actually there's no real change. So we would have, under those delegated arrangements, we would have probably done the remaining part over a telephone conference call anyway. So, you know, that it shouldn't really disrupt the proceedings, and we're quite used to working remotely in a number of instances.
Any other questions from councillors? Give my screen a good old scan one more time. I can't see anyone. So thank you, BDO, for coming and giving us that update. You are free to go if you would like to, or if you would like to remain for the rest of the meeting, you're free to do that as well. We move on to item 5, which is written questions and petitions. Adam?
There aren't any.
Oh, okay. Non-contentious business.
That's for the committee to decide.
I'll pass over to Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Just items 8 and 9, they're annual reports. There's nothing we can do about them. They're only for noting, yeah, unless members have any questions or anything.
Going to hand over, Councillor Perrin, I'll take him first.
Just to say I agree with Councillor Carter.
Going to pass over to Sarah Marsh, and hopefully video and audio is working.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me? Apologise for turning up late. I'm quite happy for the non-contentious to be the annual report of the Audit Committee. However, it's very important that we go through my annual report and about that as an item, please.
Councillor Clark.
Well, I thought the main business seemed to come in 8 and 9, as far as I can see. I'm not sure.
Tempted to run through the agenda as is, and if there's no, introduce each topic as it goes, and if there are no questions, we'll just note them as and when it happens. I don't know why I keep on muting myself. Anyway, on to committee work plan, which is on pages 7 to 8. Over to Simon Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of the work plan was pulled together a little earlier in the sort of the work cycle, and I think it's just important that the committee are aware that there probably needs to be some changes. So if I just explain why, as a result of the current COVID situation, there has been agreement nationally that the previous deadlines for the production of local authority accounts has been extended. So whereas we were hoping to bring the signed off accounts to you in August, we won't actually be in a position to do that now, because our completion of our draft accounts has moved from the end of May to the end of June, and our audit won't actually start until the beginning of September. So what I was going to propose to the committee tonight to bring the work plan in line with those changes is that on the August meeting, we move the first 3 items into the November meeting, and to help them with the August meeting, and we've agreed that this can be achieved, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th items on the November meeting, so starting period 8 internal activity report and finishing with the review of the anti-fraud and corruption strategy, will all move to August and be reported earlier to the August committee. And that should then enable us to align with the new reporting requirements for the accounts for 2019-20.
Any questions or comments? So it's agreed to make those changes. Can I just see a verbal nod or a thumbs up? Oh, that's so pleasing to see. Brilliant. That's great. On to agenda item 8. Audit and Standards Committee Annual Report 1920, and I will hand over to Simon Freeman.
Sorry, Chair. I'm just sticking with the work plan. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
On the second page, we have the items for training, and we just need to work out how we will deliver the training on the accounts, because it can be quite technical, and we will probably end up delivering that via one of these kind of meetings, but we will notify all committee members as to how that's going to be delivered nearer the time. So I just thought I'd mention that.
I've seen training work from my own place of work with a shared screen, and that can sometimes be really successful. So hopefully the council can do something similar to that. Any questions on the train? Lisa, I'll bring in Lisa.
Sorry, while we're still on the work plan, I've just noticed the annual audit letter for 2019-20 is on the November committee, but that will come to March if we're presenting the completion report and signing off in November. So that one will need to move to the next meeting.
Thank you. That seems perfectly reasonable as a consequence. Any questions? I did see Russell's hand. Just shake your head if you still got one. Yep. Councillor Perrin.
It's been a couple of minor changes, Chair. Do we all need to vote on this again?
Can I see agreement for the minor changes that have been issued? That's been agreed. Thank you, Councillor Perrin. Okay, moving on from the audit plan onto item 8, which is the annual report, pages 9 to 15. I'll hand over to Sarah Marsh.
Thank you, Chairman. So, in line with good practice, each year we recommend a report that goes to council on all the good work that the audit committee does. I think it's really useful document, especially those who are new onto the audit committee, because it shows the wide range of activities that you actually undertake. A lot of people think that this audit committee is quite dull and we only look at finances, but there's so much more to it, and you need to keep your finger on the pulse for the council. I'd just like to bring your attention to item 27, which talks about having an independent member on the committee. It was agreed, the committee agreed that this would take place. We actually had 3 or 4 applicants, and we were going to bring them in for interview, but obviously that's been put on hold, and we've told them that, and hopefully when we're in a better position we can perhaps do that interviews, and we can do that by Zoom if we're not back in the offices at that point. And also on item 29, it talks about, there is that slight mention there of coronavirus, and that because it was just a very small part of the 1920 year, there was no breakdown of controls in that very short period. So it's just a passing nod to coronavirus, as we have to acknowledge in most of our reports at the moment. That's all I need to say about the report.
Any questions or comments? I see Councillor Clark has got a hand up.
Comments, are we?
Comments or questions?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was on the question of the COVID-19. I realise this is the last year, but I was surprised to see that there's been very little notification of it, or even recognition of it much later on in the subsequent reports. But it's as much, we had a meeting and we didn't mention it ourselves. So is it just because I'm assuming we should have started off much more robustly, not necessarily in the council, but nationally? And that's how I perceive everything. But it affects the assurance framework and the anti-fraud and corruption, particularly because we agreed the anti-corruption and agreed to continue with it in the following year quite happily. And yet that's an area which there's been quite a dramatic increase in fraud and corruption, I gather, because of COVID-19. People have adjusted their varying ways of finding how to commit fraud. And I was just wondering, it may entirely be my perception, but whether in fact there is anything happening whatsoever in relationship to COVID-19, 1920, and then our deductions about it for the following year, if you follow me.
Pass over to Sarah Marsh.
So a lot of this will come out of the annual governance statement, where we do have to talk about the governance arrangements between 19 and 20. Regarding the audit committee, we were very fortunate that we managed to get our last meeting of the year in before we went into lockdown, whereas my other two councils, we had to cancel those meetings. Therefore, the governance framework wasn't broken, but we just need to make mention of it. So this report is to talk about the work of the audit committee and what you've done over the year, and you've done a fantastic amount of work, and that's reflected in the report. And it was, and your work as an audit committee really wasn't affected by the lockdown
Right.
financial year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'll pass over to Simon Freeman.
I suppose, Chair, just picking up on something that Councillor Clark has just sort of touched on around fraud. Clearly it doesn't directly relate to this report, but given that it's been raised, just make the point that I think over the last 3 months now, only in recent weeks, probably the last fortnight actually, have we really started to see any increase in fraudulent activity. And this is more directed at people trying to obtain company details in order to claim some of the government grants that we're administering. So we're very much aware of those scams and things that people are trying to do to secure grant payments. And if I can just give assurances to the committee that we have a pretty robust process in place for claiming those grants, and we are very much on the ball with being aware of the type of information that people are trying to obtain fraudulently to enable the grant process to be then started using that information. And to date, that's all gone very well. We've actually rejected some claims early on where we didn't think that they were legitimate, and we've had no challenge to that. So the process is pretty robust around the grants that we're administering, and I think hopefully that gives some assurance around the immediate areas of fraudulent activity that we've been exposed to during the first few weeks of the lockdown.
I think that's very reassuring to hear. Are there any other questions or comments? The only thing I'd like to add is audit is by far the most interesting committee, and it's why I love chairing it. And this report does show the value of that committee and the work that we do. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing it to us. So is the annual audit report agreed? Give me a nod or a thumbs up or a shake of the head. I see that as carried. Perfect. Thank you. Back to the agenda. Okay, we're on to point 9, which is the internal audit annual report for 1920. I believe I'm passing over to Sarah again.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This report is a really important report because it feeds into the annual governance statement, and the annual governance statement you'll be getting later on in the year, which will support the financial statements that also you will get later on. So that's why I want to make sure it was a non-contentious business. So the most important item you need to look at is item 6, So that gives my opinion based on all the work and the knowledge that I have of the council. And it says that we have adequate and effective governance, risk management arrangements and control processes. I mean, that's really good news. That's the highest praise I can give. Adequate and effective is good.
You could say excellent.
Actually say those words, and if there was any particular area that I thought was particularly bad within the council, then I would put a caveat within that opinion, but it is a clean opinion there, so you should be pleased with the people that I'm able to give that. So if we go down to item 14 on page 19, there's a table there of all the audits that we've done with a comparison on previous years. So we did a total of 11 actual assurance audits, and it's really pleasing that the majority are substantial or moderate. So again, you should be congratulated on that. There was just the one limited report, which was the former tenant arrears one. So it's, you might say, oh, I want all my audit reports to be substantial, or 12 or 11 of them should be substantial, but then I would be querying it as an audit committee member. Surely I'm only auditing the easy things then, or the things that management want me to look at. So it's important that I have done a wide range of audits and advisory work across the council, and that's borne out in the Appendix A. Going down further in the report, I talk about the item 26 and 27. I talk about the effectiveness of internal audit. So part of my it's prescriptive, the sort of things I need to tell you in my annual report, and the one is to confirm that you have an effective internal audit function. So that's given that there. And then we have these KPIs against which we measure ourselves and the council. And then I want to draw to your attention that the management responses, so we've completely blown the 10 working days agreement that we have in place, but we have had not problems, but finalising audit reports in the last sort of in end of March, April, May time, because people have been diverted on other work, and that has inflated the figures. They were above the 10 days anyway before that. And it's an area of work that we need to work with management to make sure that we get those responses in time. But sometimes we need to take a bit of time to come up with a pragmatic solution. So it's no good us recommending something and it's not workable. So sometimes we have to do some negotiation, or we have to wait to see what's going to happen. So it's one that we need to keep an eye on, and as I say, we'll be working with heads of service to get that down. The rest of the report, so as I say, Appendix 8 gives you a good flavour of all the work that we've done, and that helps support that opinion that I'm giving overall. Thank you.
Open the floor to questions and comments. Councillor Clark?
Yes, we had less substantial, actually, as you said, but on the other hand, less limited than last year anyway. So I suppose it's a win overall, I'm not sure. On the management, effective management, you say, I mean, one of the explanations was in relationship to, was it? Oh, that was the Christmas break, wasn't it? And some other explanation which I've forgotten instantly, and you did mention. But are we to be assured that they will bring those quite striking differences from the original plan? Do we feel happy about that? And should we make further comment on it?
I think my question is it actually a realistic target? If it's constant, if it's failed on the last 2 times, I know we have close links to Broxbourne and Epping. Do they have a similar target in their plan, and are they reaching it? And if they are, so the question is, if they're not reaching it, is it a realistic target? and should the target be reassessed? And if they are reaching it and we're not, what's the difference? Because I understand that this year is affected by COVID-19, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to have as a caveat to a lot of the work that the council is doing, because the focus has been moved onto controlling this and getting the best for our residents in Harlow. But if it's a year-on-year difference and there's that gap every year, then do we need to reassess the KPI, or do we need to knock some heads together to make sure that that target is reached? I will pass over to Sarah Marsh for comment.
So we had the same KPI with Epping and Broxbourne, and they haven't met it either. But there's different reasons for different councils and different audits why we don't get that agreement. I wouldn't want to change it, because the importance is to make change, and we can't start tracking the recommendations until the report's been finalised. I'm willing to give some leeway, but if we allow it to drift, then we'll get a culture of indifference and lack of engagement. So I'd like to keep it and to keep the pressure on and to knock something together.
And as usual, if that target keeps on being not met after this year, please tell them that they are invited to the Audit and Standards Committee to explain why it isn't being met on certain issues. Any more questions or comments on this report? So this report is noted. Can I just see a nod for noted? Thank you very much. And I'll just scroll back to the agenda quickly. I really do miss paper sometimes. I think we are now...
like I did.
Thank you very much, God. On to agenda item 10, period 2, internal audit activity report. I'll pass over to Sarah Marsh again.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is our usual progress report, giving you an update on the audits that we have completed. So we've issued 5 audit reports. So the first one is the housing contracts non-HDS. So this is where we're putting moves and put things in. So we've given that substantial assurance. That was a really good audit with fantastic good practice that we can share with the other 2 councils that we work with. And we ended up making no recommendations, which is, very unusual for us to have auditor. So that was a really pleasing area to look at. So the second report is former tenant arrears, and we've given that one a limited assurance. So we've revisited a previous audit that we did in that area. We wanted to get into a bit more detail because we were worried that the former tenant arrears were going up. So they had taken their eye off the ball on former tenant arrears, and we've given them some suggestions, and they've agreed with that and how that can be taken forward. As you're probably aware, we have put collecting debt at the moment on a hold as we have nationally, so that will take time to come into effect. Business continuity, so luck would have it, we were literally just finishing the business continuity audit as we went into lockdown. So overall, we had a business continuity plan. We've proven that it works. We're still delivering services as a council, but there's areas that we could tighten up, especially making sure it's linked with the disaster recovery and looking at our priority systems as they come up. So we're doing a piece of work to make sure the council is learning from its business continuity through this COVID-19 lockdown and recovery phase, and that will be built into the recommendations that we've made in that report. Corporate health and safety. So health and safety has moved from one service area to another. So the person who's responsible for this area was really keen to have this audit to see was everything okay and in place, and were there areas for improvement. So overall, we have quite a sound framework as a council to do with health and safety, but there are some areas that we just need to tighten up on, and that will be taken forward. That's around risk assessment, making sure we have more of a central overview of those. We do have them in place, but not quite as pulled together as they could be. And also we just need to make sure that our health and safety training, again, we have that corporate overview. Health and safety training is taking place and it's being been documented and evidence, but again, we don't have that overview as a council. And then the last report, commercial rent. So the council does a really good job putting in the money from its commercial rent. So what we're recommending here is more of a tightening up of procedures, making sure that we have sort of policies and protocols to guide our officers, and to make sure that we've got a really tight system there. So there wasn't any fundamental weaknesses with commercial rent. Section 4 talks about the other work that we've been doing. So we've been trying to, during this lockdown period, is finish the audit plan, which we did in the main. We're trying to sort of get going, but we've also been giving you lots of advice. So as they've been changing controls, doing things more remotely, not having things like wet signatures, we've been giving advice there. We've been talking to the resident spends manager about the business grants that's taking a lot of their time at the moment, and there's a lot of checks and things that we can put in place and that they are putting in place. We're also making sure business as usual is taking place. So we've got a new HR system coming in. So we were reviewing the project plan there, making sure that is going to go ahead despite being in lockdown. So we've been keeping busy, which is good. Recommendation tracker. So, excuse me. So the total number of overdue recommendations is 17, and we've got 2 additional ones which are high. So they both come out of the former tenant arrears report. So if you remember, I will report to you all overdues and all high, so that you're aware of those. Now, 11 of those 17 overdue recommendations are being delayed because of COVID-19, and I think that is justified. But we are keeping an eye on it because we don't want COVID-19 being used as an excuse not to implement our recommendations if they can do. I think that's all I want to say at this point.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll pass over to Councillor Carter first.
Thank you. Just a technical point. The audio quality from Sarah wasn't very good, and I certainly missed the last few sentences. If there's anything sort of she needs to emphasise again, that'd be helpful. But certainly, I didn't catch the closing comments.
I think Sarah's just plugging in some headphones now. I'll ask her to go back over the tracker and just give the update on the tracker. I think that was the last couple of sentences. And then I will have a chat with Adam and Simon about getting her some better equipment for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Well, with respect, it may be some domestic issues about the setup she has at home as well.
Absolutely, yes, I completely agree.
Someone can perhaps talk to her afterwards and take it through. Thank you.
Sarah, do you want to try with the headphones? I'll just take you off mute. I can do that myself. No. Oh. There we go. Do you want to try now, Sarah?
Right. Can you hear me?
That's much better. Could you just clarify over the last point, which was the tracker? I think that was the bit that was missed.
Okay, I apologise for that. So I was saying that we've got 17 overdue recommendations, and another 2 which are not yet due. So they're 2 high ones that are relating to the former tenant arrears. And I was reminding the committee that all overdues plus the highs always come to you. Of the 17 that are overdue, 11 of them are due to COVID-19, and I think that's acceptable at this stage, that we allow that. But I just wanted to make sure that managers wasn't using COVID-19 as an excuse for not implementing recommendations, because on the whole we should be moving forward with recommendations as they have made.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Although it relates, well, no, it doesn't. Item 40, page 42, leaseholder service charges. it says it's going to be reported to the shareholder subcommittee in July. I thought Mr. Freeman might have updated that by now, because that's not until September.
Simon Freeman.
Yeah, so I'm conscious of the fact that there are discussions taking place about the timing of the shareholder subcommittee, but I think at the point that the report was produced, that decision hadn't actually been taken. But note the point that Councillor Carter's making, that it's looking extremely likely that there will be a shareholder subcommittee in September, not July.
I think we will update the report to represent that then. Councillor Clark.
Yes, just on the question, I agree completely on the recommendation relating to former tenant arrears, which is that there should be an increased emphasis on collectible former tenant debt, alongside the especially the write-off very old debt. There was a mention in a later report, I've forgotten what it was, perhaps the tracker developments there, of a debt that was going back to 93, and we were still sort of chasing it. Well, that seems a complete waste of time, to be honest. I think we should write more off.
And you're quite right, and that's what we've recommended in the report, is that we look at it carefully and start writing some of this off.
Yeah.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. With my hat as shadow housing portfolio holder, former tenant debt is and the size of it has been an issue I have been sort of chasing through Housing Standards Board for a number of years. And the excuse has always been, well, it's resources. But I have to say, I was sort of shocked at some of the findings from internal audit about how some cases have been totally ignored. And I am now pursuing this separately with the head of housing.
Thank you for that comment. I think I share in Sarah's opinion. I'll bring Simon in now and then share my comment. Simon Freeman.
Yeah, I think just to pick up, I suppose, to an extent on Jean's comments, actually. So we are already seeing an increase in clearance of those debts that are beyond legal collection at the moment, and I am seeing more frequent reports coming forward from the Housing Service to deal with those very historic and statute barred debts at the current time. I think the point I'd make to the committee is that I think that the key here is that notwithstanding the level of existing former tenant arrears, I think where we need to get to is that we actually seize on the opportunity as soon as possible, and even before they become former tenant arrears, to find some sort of recovery action, because effectively what you find with any debt is that once the debtor has moved on, it becomes extremely difficult to track, trace and collect anything that they might owe the authority. And that's across any debt, not just former tenants arrears. Yeah. So the sooner we can act and deal with those debts going forward, notwithstanding the existing balance that we have in terms of former tenant arrears, I think that will help considerably in the future in terms of being able to collect and have arrangements in place to reduce those arrears down for those people that do end up in a former tenant arrears situation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. Is there any other comments or questions? Looking around. The one thing I was going to add is I share Sarah Marsh's comment about COVID being an okay excuse for the tracker to fall away at the moment. And I think the key word is at the moment. I think this committee has actually put a lot of pressure on that tracker coming down over the last couple of years. And it's quite scary to see those numbers creep up, and it's perfectly understandable at the moment, but there will be a time where we would need to start putting the pressure on to get that number down again. And I don't think that time is too far in the future. So although okay for now, I think it is slightly concerning still. Okay, so on the, my iPad is messed up. Sorry, bear with me. I'm going to print off the agenda next time because it's so much better. We have reviewed the outcomes and we have discussed any further considerations. Is that noted?
Noted.
Okay, on to the revised internal audit plan for 20 to 21. Over to Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. So at our March meeting, we did actually manage to approve our internal audit plan, and then we went into lockdown. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm just going to have to tear the thing up and throw it up in the air and start again. But that's not actually the case, actually. So what I've done is taken the original plan and then worked out what I think are the key priorities and the key risks for the council, both during COVID-19 and as business as usual, because we still need to carry on as a council. So what I've done is added a couple of what I call basic audits, the key financial control ones. So there's a new one there to do with accounts payable. There's a good chance of both internal and external fraud increasing during this time. You know, with doing things remotely, people might take their eye off the ball. So I'd like to go along and have a look at those controls that they've changed to say, are they working at the time? And actually, do we want to keep those as we move into a more agile way of working? Payroll is another area of potential high risk of fraud. So, but because we've got a new payroll and HR system coming in, there's no point doing a full financial controls systems audit of that. I just want to know during this period, we've been paying the right people the right amount at the right time, and again look at those controls to see which ones are going to go across into the new system. Management will also be on my list, but I already had that carried forward from the previous year, so I've kept that one in. In addition, I think disaster recovery for any council is important at this time to make sure it's fitting in nicely with the business continuity plans that are put in place. But again, I had that already in the audit plan. So some of the audits that I've asked to not to do, things like parking. So we're not taking any income from parking, so there's not any point looking at it. Events management, again, we're not doing an event, so there's no point looking at it in this year. So I only have a finite resource, so I'm basing it on a 6-month plan now, so from September. It doesn't mean that we're not working at the moment, because we are, I've told you that in the progress report, but I'm just looking for confirmation that you think I'm hitting the right areas and if we want to swap any of the audits around.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously what Sarah's saying makes a lot of sense. It's just that I'm concerned on page 60 about the Equalities Act and impact assessments as being deferred. You know, as you're probably aware, equalities and access are issues I take very seriously, and certainly there have been regular issues over the years, which I think the council could be doing better. So I would much prefer that not be deferred, but also, you know, sort of given the pressures under COVID and the problems over support for people, for vulnerable people, I would have thought that would be a much more acute area that we ought to be looking at to make sure that we are doing all that we can. There are a couple of items on page 58 which could possibly be pushed back a bit. Performance management framework. Performance management monitoring is going to be all over the place at the moment. It's going to take a little while to settle down. So now is probably not the right time to look at that. And possibly service business planning and risk management. Obviously, risk management is very important. But again, I think we need to wait for events to roll out before we can actually sort of start looking to see how they're actually operating. So I'd prefer to move equality action and impact assessments into the current plan.
So I will take other comments and then come back to Sarah. So I'll take Councillor Clark first, and then I'll go over to Councillor Mason. I have got your hand, so don't worry. Councillor Clark.
I share that view actually, and I think especially at the current time, I think it's very important. Okay.
Councillor Mason, I have got Councillor Perrin. You can remove your hand. Councillor Mason.
Yeah, I'd agree completely with Simon. I was going to raise that because actually I've had a couple of meetings with Simon Hill already, and that was one of the things that I'd raised, especially when I looked at the equalities policy, and it didn't even mention two of the protected characteristics. So I have, you know, I would agree that that really does need to come forward. And although the Lee Manning, it's covering financial aspects, and it was part of 2019-20, the fact is the Lee Manning Centre hasn't been open since COVID, and it's unlikely to be open for the next 3 months as well. So really, I think that could probably be, that was 25 audit days, that could probably be shifted slightly, really. That's just my view.
Okay, Councillor Perrin.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I agree with Councillor Carter's input. There is just one addition, though. If I'm understanding the table correctly, we're saying that the data sharing with third parties has to be deferred. Is that correct? I would take a different view to that, given the level of fines that are associated with failing GDPR compliance. I think if it hadn't been for that piece of legislation, I would have probably agreed with you, but I think that possibly should come back in because of the severity of the fines of non-compliance if we aren't following that rigorously. You might want to reduce the number of audit days you might support with that, but I think that needs to come back.
So I'll make a couple of comments myself. I think the room definitely does share the opinion of Councillor Carter. And I think he probably has highlighted 10 days of audit in which can be changed. My problem with the third parties issue is we then have to find a subsequent 15 days worth of audit. So I'll pass over to Sarah for comment.
So we do track if we have any data breaches, and I'm happy to say that our data breaches are small in number, and they tend to do with usually staff sort of sending emails to the wrong people. They type in the email address and it comes up automatically, and they're just not looking at it. Or if they double stuffing envelopes with letters, if they're putting council tax bills and then accidentally another letter gets put in with it. So the assurances I can give you on the third party is that we haven't had any data breaches in that area. It is an area that we audited a while ago, and the recommendations there have now been put in place because they were on the tracker and now been taken off. So if you want it, I'll shoehorn it in somehow, but I don't. It could wait until the 2021-22 plan. And then the other point I just want to make, well, 2 points. Lee Manning is already a deferred audit, so I take on board that we shouldn't be auditing that because we're not providing the service at the moment in full. And I'm more than happy to do that Equalities Act audit. It's great to do an audit that I know that the committee are keen on, it gives us a buzz to actually do some really worthwhile work, and I can juggle the days around as suggested to do with performance management and the risk management.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. I think Councillor Carter agrees with his clap, and I think that's probably shared by the rest of the committee because of the voices that I heard in the debate. I kind of agree with you, Sarah, on the GDPR. I know a lot of work was done on setting up GDPR correctly. I think every company across the country was faced with a mountain of work, and that was only a couple of years ago. I think that is okay to wait and be deferred. I'm kind of looking at Councillor Perrin to see if he kind of agrees or if he would like to come back in.
I'm not that wedded to it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Perrin. That's very good to hear. So with the changes that we have just made, does the committee approve the revised audit plan for 2021? Looking for nods and thumbs up. Thank you for the virtual thumb up, Councillor Johnson. And now back to the agenda. We are from references from other committees. Adam, you're going to say none.
There are none.
And any matters of urgent business? There is none. Thank you very much for this virtual meeting, and thank you for your attendance. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.